Hello guys, this is your fanfic dojo and we are back with our new fanfic, which is What If Naruto Never Forgot About Sakura Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and please subscribe to the channel. It motivates me to upload more fanfic like these for you all. Now let's start the fanfiction. The days that followed their quiet night in the forest felt like a new chapter in their journey. Haruki had never felt such peace in the midst of a storm, both literal and metaphorical. The bond with Sakura that had blossomed in the shadows of their shared mission now felt like a quiet anchor in the chaos of their world. But even as they traveled, tracking down the shattered shinobi, the weight of his duties as Hokage never left him. Haruki had always known that being Hokage would require sacrifices. He had been prepared for the long nights, the constant responsibility, the countless decisions that would shape the future of the village. But what he hadn't anticipated was how lonely it would sometimes feel, even with the village's support. The burden of leadership was heavy, and though he had the village's trust, there were still moments where the isolation seemed unbearable. But with Sakura by his side, that isolation felt more manageable. She wasn't just a trusted comrade or the woman he had shared a kiss with, it was deeper than that. She was the one person who had always been there for him, the one who understood him in ways that few could. And now, as the new Hokage, he knew that she would continue to be his most valuable ally, not just in battle but in life. They arrived at a small village on the outskirts of the Land of Fire by the evening of the third day. The tension in the air was palpable, and the villagers seemed nervous, aware of the threat of the shattered shinobi but unsure of how to deal with it. Haruki and Sakura made their way to the local inn, where they were to meet with the intelligence agents who had been tracking the rogue ninja. The inn was quiet, the only sound the clink of cups and the murmured conversations of the other travelers. Haruki sat at a corner table, watching the door as Sakura spoke with one of the village officials. The mission ahead wasn't clear, there had been too many rumors, too many shifting reports, but one thing was certain. The shattered shinobi were growing bolder, and their attacks were more coordinated than before. When Sakura returned, her expression was serious, her brow furrowed in thought. They're not far. A few miles to the east. There's a hidden camp, deep in the forest. But it's not just a group of rogue ninja. They have something else with them, something dangerous. Haruki nodded, feeling the weight of the information settle in his chest. Then we move tonight. We can't afford to wait. Sakura's gaze softened, but there was no hesitation in her voice. I'll be ready. They packed their gear quickly, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The moon hung high in the sky as they made their way into the woods, the trees surrounding them like silent sentinels. The night felt colder than it should have been, the sense of danger palpable in the air. They moved with precision, each step taken carefully as they navigated the dense forest, heading toward the location where the shattered shinobi were believed to be hiding. Haruki's mind was sharp, his senses heightened. Every rustle in the trees, every shift in the air, made him pause, but he didn't falter. His thoughts were on the mission, on the village, and most of all, on Sakura. The closeness they shared gave him strength, but it also made him more protective. He couldn't let anything happen to her, not after everything they had been through together. As they approached the clearing where the shattered shinobi's camp was supposed to be, Haruki signaled for them to stop. He crouched low, scanning the area. The campfire flickered in the distance, shadows dancing around the figures gathered near it. There were at least a dozen of them, more than Haruki had expected. And there, standing among them, was a figure that sent a chill down his spine. The leader of the shattered shinobi, cloaked in black, their face hidden by a mask, stood tall. Their presence exuded power, a dangerous, unsettling aura. Haruki's grip tightened on the hilt of his blade. He could feel the weight of the moment, the calm before the storm. We need to move now, he whispered to Sakura. Stealth is key. She nodded, her expression as determined as ever. We'll take them by surprise. With that, they advanced, moving in sync like two shadows in the night. The wind howled through the trees, masking their movements as they neared the camp. Haruki's heart beat loudly in his chest as they drew closer, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Whatever the shattered shinobi were planning, they were about to find out just how far Haruki and Sakura were willing to go to protect the peace they had fought so hard to achieve. The moment they stepped into the clearing, everything changed. The air seemed to crackle with energy, and the masked leader turned, their eyes flashing with recognition. Haruki knew they had been waiting for him, waiting for the Hokage. "Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick," the leader called, their voice cold and detached. Haruki's eyes narrowed. "I won't let you destroy this village." The battle had begun. The forest erupted in motion. Haruki dashed forward like a streak of lightning, blade unsheathed and eyes locked onto the masked leader. Around him, the shattered shinobi moved in coordinated arcs, forming a deadly perimeter. But they hadn't expected Sakura. She struck first. Her chakra-infused fist shattered the earth beneath the nearest enemy, sending shockwaves that threw several off their feet. Her movements were precise, trained from years of combat, but now sharpened by something deeper, a desire to protect Haruki, to protect the bond they had begun to acknowledge, even if only silently. Haruki clashed with the masked leader at the center of the chaos. Steel met steel, sparks flying in the darkness as chakra rippled through the clearing. The leader was strong, fast, and with a technique Haruki hadn't seen before. Shadows coiled around them like sentient smoke, responding to their will, shifting to strike and defend with eerie coordination. "You're not just another rogue," Haruki growled between parries. "Who are you?" The masked figure didn't answer, only intensified their assault. Haruki ducked a blade of shadow and responded with a burst of wind chakra, slicing through the tendrils that tried to latch onto his arms. His thoughts flickered. He needed an opening. He needed to end this quickly. Sakura was holding her own, but he could sense her chakra dipping. She'd taken out 5 already, but more were closing in. Haruki gritted his teeth and flared his chakra, the air around him shimmering as wind swirled to life. He caught the masked leader off guard, a powerful slash forcing them to leap back, breaking the rhythm of their assault. "Sakura," he called, and she responded instantly, leaping into the space between him and the reinforcements with a devastating roundhouse kick that sent another attacker flying. "Just like we trained," she said breathlessly, her lips quirking into a half smile. "Better," he muttered, then turned his attention back to the leader, who had recovered and was now weaving hand signs faster than Haruki could follow. The ground beneath them pulsed with unfamiliar energy. A seal. Something old. Then it hit. The clearing twisted as a dome of shadow erupted around them, cutting off sound and light, wrapping the battlefield in unnatural silence. Haruki felt it immediately. His chakra wasn't flowing right. It was sluggish, disrupted. Beside him, Sakura stumbled slightly, hand clutching her side where blood now trickled. "Sakura, I'm okay," she said quickly, even though she wasn't. "But this isn't just ninjutsu. It's a binding field." Haruki looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. The seal etched into the sky above shimmered with malevolent energy. The masked leader raised their hand, and the shadows moved like a wave. "You should have stayed in the village, Hokage. You've walked into your own grave." Haruki didn't flinch. He stepped forward, drawing on every ounce of chakra he could summon despite the drain. "If I die here, I die protecting what matters. And I won't die alone." Sakura joined him, side by side, chakra flickering stubbornly against the oppressive dome. Their hands brushed briefly, just a second, but enough to remind them both why they were still standing. Then they attacked together. It wasn't just brute force, it was synchronized precision. Sakura struck the base of the dome with a chakra punch that reverberated through the seal, while Haruki forced the masked figure to defend, buying her time. The barrier cracked slightly. Not enough. They needed more. "Draw it out," Sakura gasped. "It's core. It's feeding on your chakra. Starve it." Haruki nodded and did the opposite. He flared his chakra so wildly that the dome responded instantly, stretching, convulsing to consume it. But that brief imbalance was all they needed. Sakura leapt, fist glowing brighter than ever before, and smashed through the weakest point. The dome shattered in a pulse of black mist, light returning like a crashing tide. The masked leader staggered, exposed and off balance. Haruki moved in. Their blades clashed once more, but this time, Haruki had the edge. With a sharp pivot and a wind-laced cut, he disarmed them, slamming the enemy into the dirt. The mask cracked. A woman, younger than he expected, eyes filled with rage and loss. "You don't understand," she hissed. "The shinobi system, it can't be saved. I lost everything to it. Families, friends, peace is a lie." Haruki's blade hovered inches from her throat, trembling slightly. "I do understand," he said quietly. "I know what it's like to lose everything. But I won't abandon the people who believe in something better." The woman didn't answer. She closed her eyes. Haruki lowered the blade. "Sakura," he said, his voice tight, "restrain her. We'll take her back." Sakura did as he asked, though her hands were bloodied and her body shaking. As they stood over the wreckage of the camp, with the survivors subdued and the leader in custody, the adrenaline began to fade. Haruki turned to Sakura, his voice low. "You saved me. Again." She looked at him, bruised but smiling through it. "We saved each other." Their eyes lingered, and in that quiet moment, beneath the trees that had once threatened to consume them, something unspoken passed between them again. But this time, it didn't feel unfinished. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them could deny any longer. Not after what they had just survived together. Not after what remained unspoken had finally begun to find its voice. They made their way back to Konoha slowly, their injuries manageable but the weight of what had occurred pressing heavier than any wound. The silence between them wasn't awkward this time, it was saturated with the things neither of them needed to say out loud anymore. Every glance, every step in sync, spoke volumes. As the gates of Konoha came into view, Sakura's pace slowed. Haruki noticed and stopped beside her. "You okay?" She nodded but didn't move. "Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if things had gone differently? If we'd figured things out sooner?" His eyes searched hers, and for a moment, he didn't see the medic Nin or the teammate or the battle-hardened Kunoichi. He saw the girl who had stood beside him in war, who had cried for others even when she had no tears left for herself, who had smiled through heartbreak and loss, and never stopped being kind. "I used to," Haruki admitted. "But now I think, maybe we needed all those mistakes to see each other clearly." Sakura gave a soft, broken smile. "Then why does it still hurt so much?" "Because we never let ourselves hope," he whispered. "Not really. Not after Sasuke." She looked down. "He's not coming back. I've accepted that." "I know." Silence again. But this time, it pulsed with anticipation, like a dam about to break. Haruki took a step closer. "And what if I said I don't want to spend the rest of my life waiting to say what I mean?" Sakura's breath caught, but she didn't look away. "Then say it." The vulnerability in her voice struck him deeper than any blade. For all her strength, all her brilliance, she still feared being left behind again. He saw it in her eyes. And he hated that fear had ever made her doubt her worth. He reached up slowly, brushing a loose strand of pink hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, reverent, like she was something sacred. "I love you, Sakura." She blinked. The words hit like a jutsu, stunning, undeniable. Her hand reached for his without thinking, their fingers locking in quiet urgency. "I never stopped," she whispered, voice thick. "Even when I didn't know how to say it. Even when I thought I had to love someone else just to protect myself. You don't have to protect yourself from me." "I know," she said, and tears slipped free, unashamed. "I think I always knew." He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that contrasted the strength he always carried as Hokage. Here, there were no missions. No shadows of old teammates. No expectations. Only them. Only what had always been there, waiting beneath the surface. By the time they reached the Hokage Tower, the sun was beginning to dip beneath the horizon. Konoha's streets glowed gold, and the village bustled around them, unaware that something had just shifted, something deeply personal and long overdue. Sakura followed him up the stairs, neither of them speaking. But when they reached his office, she didn't turn to leave like she usually did. Instead, she stepped inside with him and closed the door behind her. He didn't question it. He simply walked to the window, looking over the village he'd sworn to protect, the future he'd bled to build. She stood beside him, and he reached for her hand. I used to think being Hokage meant I couldn't have anything personal. That if I loved someone, I'd be putting them in danger, or failing them. Sakura leaned her head on his shoulder. And now I think, love is part of what gives us the strength to keep going. Without it, all this, he gestured to the world outside, would be meaningless. She nodded against him. Then let's stop running from it. His voice cracked slightly, but he smiled. No more what ifs. No more what ifs, she echoed. And with that, they simply stood together. Naruto, the man who had once carried the world's loneliness in his heart, and Sakura, the woman who had healed more than just wounds. Outside, Konoha glittered under the twilight, peaceful for once. But inside that room, a different kind of peace settled. One born not from duty, but from finally choosing each other. That night lingered in their memories like a quiet flame, gentle, unwavering. It didn't burn fast, didn't demand attention. It simply existed, warm and alive in the corners of their hearts where hope had once withered in silence. Naruto stayed by the window even after Sakura fell asleep on the couch beside his desk, the soft rise and fall of her breath a lullaby to everything he'd ever missed. He'd given so much of himself to this village, to its people, to the legacy of peace. But in doing so, he'd forgotten to make room for something just as essential, for someone who saw beyond the title of Hokage, beyond the legend. He looked down at her, a peaceful expression softening her features. She was so often fierce, so often carrying burdens heavier than most shinobi could imagine. But here, in this room, she had let them fall. And that trust, it meant everything. He moved quietly, pulling a blanket over her. She stirred slightly but didn't wake, just murmured his name under her breath like it was a tether keeping her grounded. Naruto sat on the floor beside her, his back against the couch. His hand found hers again, and he held it, just needing to feel her there, real and close. He hadn't planned any of this. It had happened slowly, then all at once, like a river breaking through a dam after years of pressure. And now that he'd crossed that invisible line, there was no going back. Nor did he want to. Morning sunlight spilled through the window as Sakura stirred. Her fingers brushed through his unruly blonde hair, and when he turned to look up at her, sleep still clinging to her eyes, she smiled. Did you sleep at all? She asked, voice rough but kind. He shrugged, squeezing her hand. Didn't want to let go. Her smile faltered, eyes growing serious. You won't have to. He believed her. For once, he truly believed it. Asterisk. Their days didn't change drastically at first. There were still missions to assign, reports to read, patients to treat. The world didn't pause to give them time to explore their newfound closeness. But in the spaces between paperwork and patrols, between healing jutsu and council meetings, they found each other again and again. Sometimes it was just coffee shared in silence on the Hokage Tower balcony. Sometimes it was long walks through the training fields, where they would spar half-heartedly until one of them cheated and pulled the other into the grass, laughing breathlessly. And sometimes, when the hours ran long and the darkness seemed overwhelming, it was her falling asleep in his arms or him finding her asleep on the hospital couch, a blanket already waiting. There were moments of hesitation too. Moments when the ghosts of their past, of Sasuke, of pain, of years wasted not saying what they felt, crept in like old scars aching in the cold. But they talked now, not as teammates, not as Hokage and Medic Nin, but as Naruto and Sakura. And those talks, about fear, about longing, about the weight of their decisions, were more intimate than any kiss could ever be. Asterisk. One evening, after a particularly long day, Sakura showed up at Naruto's apartment. She didn't knock. She walked in like she belonged, and maybe that was the point, because she did. Naruto was still in his Hokage coat, papers scattered across his kitchen table. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment, they just stood there, letting the quiet fill in everything unspoken. Then she reached into her pouch and pulled out a single photo, worn at the edges, slightly faded. Team 7, from years ago. Kakashi's hand on Sasuke's shoulder. Naruto grinning too wide. Sakura caught mid-laugh. I look at this sometimes and wonder how we survived, she said. Naruto walked over, took the photo gently from her hands. We survived because we didn't give up on each other. Even when we should have. She looked up at him. Do you ever think we were meant to end up like this? I don't know, he answered truthfully. But I know I don't want to imagine a future without you in it. She stepped closer. You won't have to. And then she kissed him, not with hesitation, but with certainty. A promise sealed in silence. They stayed like that for a long time, and the photo remained on the table, a reminder of who they had been, and how far they'd come. Because sometimes, love didn't come with fireworks or declarations shouted to the skies. Sometimes it came quietly, in soft words and steady hands. Sometimes it came in what remained unspoken, and was finally heard. The days after that kiss felt like a second life blooming within the old one. There was still work, still wariness in the council about distant threats, still rogue missions that tugged Naruto away from home more often than either of them liked. But it was different now. The weight didn't crush him the way it used to. He didn't come back to silence anymore, he came back to her. And Sakura didn't hide behind her professionalism or worry if she was allowed to want this, want him. She no longer measured herself against the girl she once was or the love she once thought eternal. She had been in love before, yes, but what she felt now was something else entirely. It was a bond forged through scars, grown in the ashes of what they thought they'd lost. One night, Naruto came back late, his uniform torn, a gash across his shoulder, dust clinging to his hair and boots. Sakura didn't wait for him to knock. She was already outside his door when he arrived, her arms crossed, chakra laced faintly through her fingers. He gave a sheepish smile. Didn't wanna wake you. She walked straight up to him and punched him in the chest, not hard, but enough to make a point. You idiot, she whispered, eyes glassy. I always wait for you. He didn't say anything, just stepped forward, buried his face in her neck, and let the tension bleed out in a breath. They stayed like that for a long time. Later, after she patched him up and he pulled her close on his couch, they talked, not about the mission, not about jutsu or enemies or allies. They talked about mundane things. How the ramen stand had added a new flavor. How Ino kept sending her weird tea blends for stress. How Konohamaru was growing into his own. It was that kind of intimacy that surprised them both the most, not the confessions or the kisses, but the comfort of normalcy. Of just being. Naruto ran his fingers through her hair as she lay with her head on his lap, voice barely above a whisper. You ever think, maybe this is what we were always supposed to be? Sakura opened her eyes slowly, the ghost of a smile on her lips. Maybe we were too close to see it. Do you regret it? He asked after a long pause. All the time we spent chasing other things. She reached up, touched his cheek. No, because it brought us here. And here, this is enough. The words dug deep, and he knew them to be true. Not just enough, everything. Asterisk. The village began to notice. Slowly, subtly. Sai, ever the observer, mentioned that Naruto smiled more now. Kakashi, in his lazy way, gave Sakura a knowing nod one afternoon at the hospital. Even Shikamaru, when going over mission debriefs, muttered something about how Naruto's focus had improved. But it wasn't about what the village saw, it was what they saw in each other. Sakura saw the boy who had been ignored and scorned become a man who held the village together with his bare hands. Naruto saw the girl who had once cried for someone else's shadow become a woman who shined with her own light. And every time their hands found each other, in crowds or in quiet, they remembered how far they'd come. Asterisk. One rainy evening, Sakura waited for Naruto at the Hokage Tower. She wasn't on shift. She wasn't there to file reports or argue about patrol rotations. She was just there. He stepped out of his office, startled to see her, rain trailing down the glass behind her. Sakura, what's? I wanted to walk home with you, she said softly. Is that okay? His heart clenched at the simplicity of it. More than okay, he said, grabbing his coat. They walked through the rain slowly, neither using jutsu to stay dry. They let it soak into their clothes, cool and sharp. Let it remind them they were alive. That they could feel this deeply, this clearly. Sakura stopped suddenly under a lamppost, water glistening on her eyelashes. Naruto. Yeah, she took his hand. Don't wait too long to ask me to stay. His breath caught. I won't, he said. And he didn't. Because some love stories take years to begin. And when they do, they don't burn out, they endure. The days turned into weeks, and with each sunrise, their lives began to intertwine more deeply, not just in emotion, but in rhythm. They started sharing little things, morning tea at her apartment when he had time, evenings at Ichiraku, where she sat beside him with a book and a half smile as he devoured bowl after bowl. They didn't speak about the future much, not directly, but it lived between them in unspoken glances, soft smiles, and the way they never seemed to walk away from each other anymore. Naruto found that his apartment no longer felt as empty. There were her slippers by the door. Her scent clung to the cushions. Her medical pouch sat forgotten on his counter more often than not. He never asked her to move in. She never announced she had. It just happened. Like rain settling into soil. Sakura had never imagined herself here. Not like this. Not with him. And yet, in the quiet, in the stillness of evenings shared with laughter and aching silences, she realized she hadn't stopped falling for him. Not since the moment he stood beside her after Sasuke left and didn't let her drown in grief. Not since he never gave up. Not on the village, not on himself, not on her. One evening, Naruto came home to find the lights dim and the scent of something unfamiliar drifting from the kitchen. Sakura stood barefoot, hair tied up messily, humming softly to herself. She turned and smiled, a little nervous. I tried cooking, she said. Don't laugh. Naruto blinked, heart stuttering at the domesticity of it all. You cooked. She crossed her arms, mock stern. You make that sound like I've committed a war crime. He laughed and wrapped his arms around her from behind. No way. I love it. I love this. She leaned back into him, letting herself be held. Dinner was a mess. The rice was a little burnt, and the curry too spicy. But they ate it all, laughing until their stomachs hurt. Later, lying beside him under the soft flicker of streetlights slipping through the curtains, Sakura whispered, "Do you think we could have had this sooner?" Naruto was quiet for a long time before answering. Maybe. But I think, maybe we needed the pain first. To understand what it means to have peace. To love someone not just because we're chasing something, but because we know what it feels like to lose it. Sakura nodded, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his chest. I think so too. The silence returned, but it wasn't empty, it was full of everything unspoken, everything understood. Some nights, they still woke from dreams with ghosts of the past clinging to their breath. Memories of battles, of friends lost, of wounds that even time hadn't fully healed. But they faced them together now. No longer alone. No longer pretending. And when Naruto reached for her hand in the dark, she always took it. Every single time. Because when two people carry the same scars, sometimes healing begins not with words, but with presence. With staying. With choosing each other, over and over, even when the world moves on. And they did. Every day. They did. Through summer rains and winter chills, through mundane days and unexpected missions, they chose each other quietly, steadily. Not with grand confessions or sweeping gestures, but with presence. With Naruto slipping a cup of warm tea into her hand after a long shift at the hospital, with Sakura pulling his coat tighter around his shoulders when he fell asleep in his Hokage chair again. One evening, as the sky bled orange and lavender over the village, Naruto stood on the Hokage monument, hands in his pockets, looking down at Konoha like he always did. Watching, guarding, loving. Sakura walked up beside him, her presence so familiar it felt like a part of his own chakra now. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. It's beautiful, she murmured, her voice soft against the wind. He nodded. I used to look at this view and wonder if I'd ever feel like I belonged here. If I'd ever stop being the outsider. She glanced at him, her gaze quiet and full. And now, I don't feel alone anymore. He smiled, still not looking at her. I feel home. The wind lifted her hair, and she stepped closer until their shoulders touched. You were always home, Naruto. You just didn't have someone waiting for you in it. The words caught him off guard, not in their content, but in their truth. She didn't say them with fanfare or expectation. She said them like a promise already fulfilled. He turned finally, eyes meeting hers, searching. Are you waiting? I'm not waiting anymore, she said, her voice strong. I'm here. He reached for her hand. Not out of impulse, not out of hesitation, but with intention. And she took it, fingers slotting between his with the kind of ease that only comes after years of knowing, of breaking, of rebuilding. That night, they didn't return to their separate places. They went home, together. In the days that followed, the village barely noticed the shift. Sakura still walked to the hospital in the early hours, hair tied up and coffee in hand. Naruto still stumbled into the Hokage's office with paperwork tucked under his arm and ramen already on his mind. But their steps matched more often now. Their laughter carried farther. Their silences, once heavy with longing, now hummed with peace. One morning, Naruto woke before her. The light spilled in pale and gold through the curtains. Sakura lay curled beside him, hair fanned over the pillow, breathing slow and even. He watched her for a moment, the way she furrowed her brow even in sleep, the way her hand reached instinctively for his under the covers. And he thought, this was what all those years of pain had led to. Not glory, not titles, not even the peace of the village. But this one moment, this quiet kind of love. Because some stories aren't forged in fire. Some are written in small things, a shared toothbrush, a worn hoodie, a smile across a crowded room. And this was theirs, still unfolding, still beginning. Because some love stories don't need to begin with a kiss. They begin the first time someone stays. And Sakura stayed. The sun rose higher that morning, painting the room in warm gold, but Naruto didn't move. He lay there beside her, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, his fingers tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. There had been so many mornings in his life that began with loneliness, a silence too loud, an apartment too cold, a heart too full of questions. But this morning, this one was different. This one was full. Sakura stirred quietly, eyes fluttering open as she turned toward him. Her gaze was still soft with sleep, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles as she caught him watching her. Have you been staring at me all morning? She mumbled, voice still thick with dreams. He grinned, brushing a strand of pink hair from her cheek. Maybe. You snore a little, you know. She smacked him lightly on the chest without heat. Liar. Only a little, he teased, and she rolled her eyes, but her fingers curled around his shirt. For a while, they lay in silence. Not the kind that begged to be filled, but the kind that said everything without words. A silence they had earned. Eventually, she pulled herself closer, her head resting just beneath his chin. Do you remember when we were kids? She asked. Back when you'd shout about becoming Hokage every 5 minutes. He chuckled, the sound vibrating through his chest. I was annoying, huh? You were loud, she said, smiling against him. But I think I always believed you. Even back then. Even when everyone else didn't. Especially then. Naruto's heart clenched, not in pain, but something deeper, something tender and raw. Because those words meant more than comfort. They meant she had seen him, even when the world chose not to. He tilted her chin up gently, meeting her eyes. I think I always loved you, he said quietly. Even before I knew what love really was. Sakura didn't answer immediately. Her eyes shimmered, but not with tears, just emotion, old and deep and finally unburdened. Then she whispered, and I think I was too afraid to see it. To feel it. But not anymore. There was no confession beyond that, no need for it. Because everything that mattered was already laid bare between them. In the way they touched, in the way they stayed. And as the village woke around them, children running, merchants opening their stalls, shinobi heading out for patrols, the world continued on, unaware that something quiet and extraordinary had begun anew. Not a love born of desperation or unfulfilled dreams. But one built from the ashes of everything they had endured. In that modest apartment tucked away behind the Hokage Tower, between the laughter and the scars, two hearts beat in rhythm. And neither of them would ever have to walk alone again. The days that followed settled into a rhythm, a shared cadence neither of them had planned but both had longed for. Sakura still returned to the hospital every morning, her presence commanding respect not through title but through quiet strength. The younger medics watched her with awe, but it was the soft smiles she gave when Naruto dropped by with lunch, or the way her eyes softened when his name was mentioned, that spoke more than rank or fame ever could. Naruto, now more than ever, carried the weight of the village with measured calm. The boy who once leapt into danger without hesitation now paced himself, not out of fear, but because he had something to return to. Someone. He'd stay a little longer at meetings, listen more intently during briefings, and when his eyes drifted out the window toward the hospital in the distance, his advisors learned not to question it. They were still themselves, loud, stubborn, flawed, but together, the edges dulled. He made her laugh louder than anyone else. She made him think deeper than anyone dared. It was imperfect, and it was real. One night, as a summer storm raged across the village, Sakura found him standing on the balcony, soaked through, arms stretched out like he was trying to catch the sky. Idiot, she murmured, pulling a towel around his shoulders. You'll catch a cold. He grinned, water dripping from his hair. It's not that cold. And I wanted to feel the rain. She stood beside him anyway, letting it fall across her face, washing away the heat of the day. It always rained after big missions, she said quietly. Like the world needed to cleanse itself. Naruto looked at her then. Not the kunoichi, not the medic, not the teammate, but the woman who had been at his side through it all. We've had a lot of rain. Yeah, she said, but this feels different. He reached for her hand, warm against the chill of the storm. Because we're not waiting for it to stop anymore. They stood like that until the thunder faded into silence, until the storm was just memory on their skin. And after, when the windows fogged and the night curled around them like a blanket, he kissed her, not out of surprise or longing, but with a quiet certainty that said you're mine and I'm yours and we always have been. Asterisk. There were still moments of hesitation. Times when old wounds reopened, when Sasuke's name passed between them like a shadow, or when the pressure of being Hokage cracked against Naruto's resolve. But Sakura never flinched. She stood beside him with hands steady and voice calm, reminding him that he didn't have to bear everything alone. Sometimes she'd wake from dreams where the war hadn't ended, where Naruto lay still beneath rubble. She'd reach for him, and every time, he was there, warm and alive, his arm pulling her close without a word. I'm not going anywhere, he'd whisper. And she'd believe him. Because some love stories aren't fireworks or fairy tales. They're slow burning, storm weathering, scar-sharing bonds that grow deeper with every ordinary day spent together. And theirs, what began as silence and sacrifice, was now rooted in something unshakable. Something that no longer needed to be spoken to be real. Autumn crept in slowly, turning the leaves of Konoha into soft golds and rusty reds. The air was crisp, the sky always clear, and for once, time seemed to pass without the threat of war or turmoil. Peace had settled into the bones of the village, and for Naruto and Sakura, it had nestled gently into the spaces between them. They'd never made a formal announcement. There had been no declarations to the village, no public proclamations. They simply were, a truth that didn't need to be spoken for others to understand. People noticed, of course. In the way Naruto's smile lingered longer when Sakura was nearby. In the way she stood just a step closer to him during missions or meetings. In the quiet conversations shared over lunch or the way they waited for each other after long shifts. Ino had caught on first, of course. "You're glowing," she had said one day, eyeing Sakura with an arched brow as they stood in the hospital break room. "I'm exhausted," Sakura replied flatly. "Glowing," Ino repeated with a smirk. "From happiness, not chakra overuse. So, you and Naruto." Sakura had only shrugged, lips hiding a smile. "We're figuring it out." Ino had laughed. "Took you long enough." But even amid the slow burn of their growing bond, shadows still lingered. Memories never disappeared entirely, especially the kind that carved themselves into skin and soul. There were still nights Naruto stared too long at the Hokage mountain, as if searching for the boy he used to be. Still days when Sakura's hand hovered over her old mission scrolls, wondering about the teammates she could no longer reach. They never pretended those things didn't exist. Instead, they let them live between them, acknowledged and shared. On some nights, they spoke in whispers beneath the covers, voices hoarse with memory. Other times, it was just the weight of a hand on a back, or a forehead pressed to a shoulder, no words needed. One evening, they stood in front of the memorial stone. The names of fallen comrades etched into the stone, cold and unmoving, while the wind stirred the leaves around them. Sakura reached out and touched the name of Neji first. Then Asuma. Then Jiraiya. Naruto said nothing, only slipped his fingers into hers. "They'd be proud of you," she said softly. He swallowed hard. "Of us, asterisk you mean?" She turned to him then, really looked at him, and nodded. "Yeah, of us." Later that night, lying in bed with her head on his chest and her breath steady against his skin, Naruto whispered into the dark, "Do you ever think it's too late? That we wasted too much time?" Sakura's fingers brushed against his. "No. Because maybe we weren't ready before. Maybe we had to lose things first. Maybe we had to become who we are now to really find each other." He held onto that thought. Wrapped it around his heart like armor. Because with all he had achieved, with the peace he had built, the legacy he had crafted, this, her, them, it was the one thing that felt truly his. Not earned through blood or battle, but through healing. Through love that endured the waiting. And as the moonlight filtered through their window, casting long silver shadows across the walls, Naruto reached out and gently touched her cheek. Sakura stirred, eyes fluttering open. He smiled, brushing his lips against her hair. "I'm just glad you're here." She shifted closer, her hand over his heart. "Me too. Because some love stories don't roar into existence. They bloom quietly in the spaces between heartbreak and hope." And theirs, at last, had begun to bloom. The seasons continued to shift, and as the village settled into its peaceful routine, Naruto and Sakura's bond grew even deeper. They found joy in the smallest things, the shared cups of tea in the morning, the soft laughs that echoed between them when they stole moments of privacy in the midst of their busy lives. For Naruto, every day felt like a gift he had fought for. He no longer carried the weight of his dreams alone. Sakura had been there beside him every step of the way, and the world he had built was no longer just for himself, it was for them. Together, They were the embodiment of everything Konoha had sacrificed for. Yet, for all the peace, there was still a part of him that couldn't quite forget the past. Old fears sometimes gripped him, reminders of what he had lost and the people who were no longer by his side. On those nights, when the weight of the village's responsibilities threatened to bury him, he'd find solace in the warmth of Sakura's presence. In the quiet moments when it was just the two of them, the world outside ceased to matter. It was one of those nights, under the quiet hum of the Hokage office, that Sakura found him staring out the window again, his gaze distant. "Naruto," she called softly, her voice breaking through the silence. He turned, a tired but soft smile on his lips. "I was just thinking about them. Everyone who didn't make it." She walked over, standing beside him at the window. The village stretched out before them, calm and peaceful. She placed her hand over his, grounding him, offering a silent promise. "They're proud of you, you know," she said. "Of everything you've done. Of everything we've done." Naruto squeezed her hand, looking down at their joined fingers, then back to the village. "I know. But sometimes it still feels like there's more I could have done. Like there are pieces of me I still haven't figured out. Or pieces of us asterisk." Sakura's heart tightened at the rawness in his voice. She moved closer, wrapping her arms around him, pulling him into her embrace. She didn't say anything for a while, just let the weight of her presence fill the space between them. "We'll figure it out together," she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. "One day at a time. And no matter what, you're not alone." Naruto closed his eyes, leaning into her warmth, the tension in his body slowly unwinding. "I know. And that means everything to me." They stayed like that for a long time, the quiet of the night surrounding them, the weight of the world lighter because they had each other. In the days that followed, Naruto and Sakura continued to build their lives together. The village thrived under Naruto's leadership, and with Sakura by his side, they helped guide Konoha into a new era of peace. Their bond, born from years of struggle, sacrifices, and unspoken love, became a symbol of strength for the village. They were the heart of Konoha, not because of their titles or their achievements, but because they had learned to build something that could withstand the test of time. And though their days were often filled with missions, responsibilities, and endless meetings, they always made time for each other. Late nights in the Hokage office, early mornings over breakfast, stolen kisses in the quiet corners of the village. The world around them continued to change, but the one constant was the love they shared. As the years passed, and the village flourished, Naruto and Sakura continued to walk forward together, hand in hand. And though they knew the future would still hold challenges, they faced them with a sense of peace and certainty, because they had each other. They had built something lasting, something that would endure no matter what storms came their way. And in the end, that was enough. Years passed, and the sun rose and set over Konoha with the quiet grace of a village that had found its peace. The streets, once filled with the echoes of war and unrest, now thrummed with the hum of everyday life. Children laughed as they ran through the marketplace, the elderly shared stories on park benches, and the shinobi went about their missions with a calm purpose. The village was alive, not just with activity but with a sense of continuity, a future built on the sacrifices of the past, and the love of those who had fought to protect it. For Naruto and Sakura, life had become a tapestry of shared moments. The days were filled with their duties, Naruto's leadership as Hokage, Sakura's work as a medic, but each moment between them, each touch, each shared glance, was a thread that wove their bond stronger. They had built their lives around each other, and the love they shared had grown into something both simple and extraordinary. It was during one of those quiet mornings, as the first rays of sunlight crept through their window, that Naruto woke to find Sakura lying beside him, her face peaceful in sleep. Her hair was spread out across the pillow, and her hand was resting on his chest, her fingers just brushing against his skin. He watched her for a while, the weight of their journey together settling over him like a warm blanket. They had fought so hard to get here, to this place of calm, and yet there were still moments when it felt like a dream. It was a dream he never wanted to wake from. Sakura stirred, her eyes fluttering open to meet his gaze. Her lips curled into a soft, sleepy smile. "Good morning," she whispered, her voice thick with sleep. "Good morning," Naruto replied, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. She sighed contentedly, nestling closer to him. "What are you thinking about?" He hesitated, his thumb tracing small circles on her hand. "I was just thinking, how lucky I am." Her heart skipped a beat, and she turned to face him fully, her eyes soft but filled with that familiar spark of affection. "You're the one who's lucky, huh?" "Maybe," he said, his voice low and filled with affection. "But I've spent most of my life alone, wondering if I'd ever find a place to belong. And now, I have everything I could ever need." Sakura's smile grew, her eyes glistening as she reached up to touch his face. "You've always had everything you needed, Naruto. You just didn't realize it until now." He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes for a moment. "Maybe. But now I know that everything I have, I want to keep. Forever." A silence passed between them, but it was not an uncomfortable one. It was the silence of two people who had been through so much, who had faced impossible odds and come out stronger. They had found each other in the chaos, and now, in the quiet moments like this one, they found peace. Naruto's hand found its way to her cheek, and he leaned down to kiss her. Soft, slow, a kiss that spoke of everything they had shared, and everything they had yet to experience. It was a kiss that marked not the end of their journey, but the beginning of something even more beautiful. When they pulled away, Sakura's eyes were full of love and warmth. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Naruto smiled, his heart swelling with the love that had always been there, but now felt deeper, more profound. "I'm proud of us." They lay there for a while, simply holding each other, their hearts in perfect harmony. The world outside continued to turn, and Konoha continued to thrive, but for that moment, in the quiet of their room, it was just the two of them. The rest of the world could wait. As the years went on, they faced challenges, as every couple does. There were moments of doubt, of hardship, moments when the weight of their roles as Hokage and healer threatened to tear them apart. But they always came back to each other. Through the storms, through the quiet, through the chaos, they found their way back. Naruto's leadership continued to shape Konoha, but it was Sakura who remained his constant, his anchor in the storm. Together, they raised a new generation of shinobi, teaching them not just the lessons of battle, but the lessons of heart. And as time passed, the village, like their love, grew stronger. Konoha had endured, and so had they. One day, as they stood together on the Hokage mountain, looking out over the village they had built, Sakura turned to Naruto, her eyes filled with the same affection she had always carried for him. "We did it," she said softly, her voice filled with awe. Naruto smiled, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Yeah, we did. Together. Together." It was a simple word, but for them, it held all the meaning in the world. Through every battle, every loss, every moment of doubt, they had always been together. And now, in the peace they had fought for, they would continue to walk side by side, facing whatever came next, unwavering, unyielding, and united. Because love, true love, didn't fade with time. It grew, and it endured. Just like the village they had built, it was rooted in something unshakable. And for Naruto and Sakura, that was enough. It would always be enough. The years continued to pass, each one building upon the foundation they had set together. Konoha had flourished under Naruto's leadership, becoming a beacon of peace and prosperity. The long nights spent strategizing and planning had paid off, and the hard work they had put in was visible in every corner of the village. The people of Konoha were content, safe, and hopeful for the future. But amidst it all, Naruto and Sakura found themselves caught in the ever-moving tide of time. Their roles in the village had become both their pride and their burden. There were days when Naruto would be buried in paperwork, surrounded by stacks of scrolls and the weight of decisions that affected thousands of lives. And there were days when Sakura would be at the hospital, healing those in need, her medical expertise still in high demand. Yet despite the busyness of their lives, they always made room for one another. Whenever the world seemed too much to bear, they found solace in each other. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, Naruto stood at the edge of the Hokage Tower, gazing over the village. He could see the children playing in the streets, the merchants tending to their shops, and the shinobi training hard to carry on the village's legacy. The village was thriving. It was everything he had dreamed of, and yet there was an emptiness inside him, a quiet longing he had come to accept, but not fully understand. Sakura appeared beside him, her presence as comforting as it had always been. She stood in silence beside him, her hand gently brushing his as they both looked out over the village. Time had etched its mark on them both. There were lines beneath Sakura's eyes, though they were more a sign of wisdom and love than age. Naruto's once bright face had matured, his hair showing a few streaks of silver, but the same spark still danced in his eyes. "What's on your mind?" Sakura asked softly, her voice familiar and warm. Naruto smiled, but it was a bittersweet expression. "I don't know, Sakura. Sometimes, I still feel like there's more to do. Like there's something I haven't quite achieved." Sakura took a step closer, placing her hand over his. "You've already done so much, Naruto. You've given everything to this village, to this world." He turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "But is it enough? I've fought so hard to create a world of peace, but I wonder if there's more we could do. I wonder if there's more I should be doing for them." She studied him for a long moment, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his eyes. "You've created a legacy, Naruto. You've built something that will last for generations. The village is alive because of you. Because of us. The world is different now because of the choices you made." He shook his head, looking down at the ground. "But peace isn't permanent. It's something we have to fight for every day. I don't want to wake up one day and realize we've lost what we fought for." Sakura squeezed his hand, her voice steady and sure. "We won't lose it, Naruto. Not as long as we're together. You and I, we'll keep fighting, but we'll do it side by side. We'll keep protecting the people we love. And no matter what happens, we'll face it together." Naruto looked up at her, his gaze softening. Together. The word held so much weight, so much meaning. It was the promise they had made to each other from the very beginning. No matter the battles, no matter the hardships, they had always faced the world together. And they would continue to do so, for as long as they could. Sakura smiled, her heart swelling with love. "You've never been alone, Naruto. And you never will be. We're in this together, now and forever." He pulled her into a gentle embrace, holding her close. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. It was just the two of them, two souls who had fought through the darkest of times to find light together. And in each other's arms, they found the strength to face whatever came next. They didn't need grand gestures or titles. They didn't need the world to see their love. They had built something unbreakable in the quiet moments, in the small gestures, in the shared days that turned into years. They had created a life together, not because it was easy, but because it was worth it. And in that moment, Naruto realized something important. He had found everything he had ever wanted, not in the title of Hokage or the peace he had fought for, but in the love he shared with Sakura. It was a love that had stood the test of time, a love that had withstood every trial, every battle, every loss. It was a love that had endured, and it would continue to endure. Because some love stories take years to begin. And when they do, they don't burn out, they endure. And Naruto and Sakura's love would last far beyond the walls of Konoha. It would live on in the stories of future generations, a testament to the power of love, hope, and the strength of those who fight for it. And so, the story of Naruto and Sakura, the story of love that had begun long ago in the heart of a war-torn world, would continue to unfold, chapter by chapter, with each day bringing them closer to a future they had built together. A future that, no matter the trials, no matter the challenges, would always be enough. The seasons shifted, and with each passing year, Konoha continued to grow, but so did the bond between Naruto and Sakura. They had long since settled into the rhythm of their lives, shared moments of joy, quiet evenings, and the occasional rush of adrenaline from missions. Together, they had created a life that was far from perfect, but it was theirs. And that was more than enough. Their love, which had once been a quiet, unspoken thing, had become a steady flame, a constant warmth that neither of them could ever imagine living without. They had weathered their fair share of storms, loss, doubt, the constant pressure of their responsibilities, and yet, they had always emerged stronger, more connected than ever. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with hues of orange and pink, Naruto and Sakura stood on the balcony of the Hokage mansion, watching the village below. The world seemed so peaceful now, but Naruto knew that peace, like all things, was fragile. It was something that needed to be nurtured, protected. And he was determined to do just that. Sakura stood beside him, her presence a comforting anchor as always. Her hand brushed against his, and they shared a quiet smile, knowing that words were unnecessary. There was a comfort in the silence between them, an understanding that had been forged through years of shared experiences, struggles, and triumphs. Sakura, Naruto said softly, his voice low as he turned to face her. Do you ever wonder what comes next? After all we've done, after all the battles we've fought, what comes after peace? She looked up at him, her eyes filled with warmth. I think the real battle is making sure that peace lasts. It's not about what comes next, it's about ensuring that what we have now continues. And we'll do that, together. Naruto smiled at her words, but there was still something in his heart that nagged at him, an ache he couldn't shake. I guess I wonder if I'm doing enough. There's always so much to do, so many decisions that need to be made. And I know I have you by my side, but sometimes it feels like there's more I should be doing, more I could give. Sakura reached out and cupped his face in her hands, her thumb gently brushing the rough skin of his jaw. Naruto, you've given everything. You've fought for this village, for its people. You've given your heart, your soul, and even your body. You've done more than anyone could ever ask of you. And you know what? You've done it without ever losing yourself. He closed his eyes at her touch, feeling the weight of her words sink in. But what if I'm not enough? Her gaze softened, and she moved closer, her forehead resting against his. You are more than enough, Naruto. You always have been, and don't you ever forget that. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the sounds of the village, the laughter of children, the chatter of families, the distant hum of everyday life. It was a peaceful sound, one that Naruto had longed for during the darkest days of his life. And now, he was living it. They were living it. Sakura, Naruto said, his voice thick with emotion, I'm so grateful to you. For everything. You've always been there for me, through all of it. And I want you to know that I'll always be here for you, too. No matter what. She smiled, her heart swelling at his words. I know. I've never doubted that for a second. Their fingers intertwined as they stood together, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky. They had made it. Against all odds, they had found each other in this vast world, and together, they had built something worth fighting for. But even as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, they knew that the future was uncertain. The world was always changing, always shifting. But as long as they had each other, they would face whatever came next. And in the quiet of that moment, as they stood side by side on the balcony of the Hokage mansion, it didn't matter what the future held. Because together, they had everything they needed. For they had found a love that wasn't just a fleeting passion or a momentary spark. It was a love that had been forged in the fires of hardship and strengthened by time. It was a love that had endured. And that was all that mattered. Together, they would face the future, unwavering, unbroken, and with the same love that had always been their guiding light. Because some love stories aren't just written in the pages of history. They live on in every heartbeat, in every shared breath, and in every quiet moment where two souls choose to stand side by side, no matter the cost. And Naruto and Sakura's love would live on forever, as unshakable as the village they had built. And as enduring as time itself.